What you know, Alibuyers, welcome in. Glad you guys could make it. This is very last minute, but I woke up this morning and I thought, what's it like to investigate a case that is being watched on a worldwide stage, and what challenges that does that pose? And also, does it benefit things? And we're going to talk about online speculation and rumor, how you figure out which tips are credible when you're getting thousands and thousands of tips. And we're going to take your questions. I've been making some notes. You can submit those in chat, and I have a moderator in here who's going to throw those up on screen when we get to a point to where we can talk about what you guys want to know. I'm waiting on Ray to pop in now. Had a bit of a problem getting the link to him, but he's got it now, so he should be on in just a second. So I'm hoping we have some big news today. We're kind of any time now of learning about this DNA. And thank you very much. I actually got these earrings for Grammy's funeral, I think. Yeah, they're newer. Y'all know I love my earrings. Hey, Jackie. Hey, everybody. We're just going to wait for Ray to get in here in just a second. Should be soon. Yeah, I did see what TMZ got another letter. We can read that real quick while we're waiting on Lieutenant Hermosillo to pop in. Robert Duvall passed away at 95. Boo Radley and The Godfather. What an awesome dude. So he was also a huge fan of Clemson University. He would come here for games. So TMZ got a fourth email from a man who claimed to know who kidnapped Nancy and where she is. Now, the FBI is aware of this, and they did give him permission to share this, is what I understand. It says, in part, I know what I saw 5 days ago south of the border, and I was told to shut up. So I know who he is, and that definitely was Nancy with them. The article says that this is the second reference he's made to there being more than one person involved. So, it's kind of hard to know if these are legit or not. Let me see. I'm gonna have to. I think Ray's lost in the cornfield. It's hard sometimes to get these things lined up, but yeah, I mean, maybe it's legit, maybe it's not. I think everything's on the table at this point until we know differently. They're definitely using the national media outlet to get their message out, whether it's bogus or not. It adds a whole layer. I am keeping up with updates. And then later today, if there is some breaking news, we will definitely go live and cover that. I think anytime now we're going to get a big update. Let me see where he's at. So apparently Brian Enton has tweeted something while we're waiting on Lieutenant Hermosillo. He's still waiting. The link? Having a hard time getting the link to him. We'll see what Brian Enton had to say. Actually, I'm gonna send it in Messenger. Okay, boo boo. All right. I'm gonna send this in Facebook Messenger. He should get it. Let me shoot this in here for him. Sorry for the delay. Sometimes these things just take a second, especially because this was last minute, and y'all know I don't ever really come on camera or have guests on. So, thanks for your patience. I just sent him something. I just sent him like a random letters, but let me. So apparently, Brian Enton's tweeted out something new. So, there we go. Ray Hermosillo. Let me send it. He's going to try to type it in. I just sent it in Messenger, bud. Don't do that to yourself. Okay. So let's see real quick while he's coming in what Brian Enton has tweeted out. Also, Justin Lum on his way down, or he's there actually. So two of my favorite guys. Sheriff says the Pima County Sheriff's Department has never stated this was a burglary gone wrong. Any reports indicating otherwise are inaccurate. This remains a very active investigation. Also, they're checking a bunch of Walmarts to see if they can find anybody who's purchased this stuff in the last few months, and they're looking outside the Tucson area as well. So that's the latest. So yeah, Justin and Brian, the dynamic duo. I wish I were out there, but I don't think they need any more media out there, right? Pretty crowded. Also, the clothing is not like exclusive to Walmart, but it is sold there. Justin Lum from Fox 10 Phoenix. He was a big part of the Lori Daybell trial. In fact, he was on scene the first when Charles was shot. So he was there day one when this started unfolding. Love Justin, love Brian, love Nate Eaton. Best part about this whole thing doing the true crime world are the friends you meet along the way that will be lifelong friends that you never would have met otherwise. So yeah, I'm excited to get Lieutenant Hermosillo's take on what all this is like, because you have your normal investigations that clearly the media is not waiting on every word. But yeah, there's just a lot I want to know. These are things I actually haven't asked him before. Yeah, thank you, Dental Lori. I gotta have some dental work done, Lori. Not happy. But let me see if he was able to get that off of Messenger. I don't want him sitting there trying to type in this whole address. But the DNA, we've got the DNA from the glove. Those results are back. They're probably running that against the unknown DNA in the house. Also, cross-referencing everybody who's given a DNA sample. And then, probably with that Range Rover that was impounded on Friday night. The thing is, we'll have to see if that ended Friday night or not. That was a federal warrant. It's not easy to get a federal warrant, y'all. You have to go in there with some pretty strong probable cause. I'm not implicating anything. But it's going to be interesting to see once they start getting these out. Yeah, it's just a bizarre case any way you look at it. I mean, there are so many possibilities. I don't think some random person just came and took her. For me, I feel like somebody was watching her. Who knows who? We have no clue. Everybody seems to be a suspect at this point. And thank you for the compliment about the background. I think we have a little problem getting Ray in here. But he will get in here if I have to go pick him up myself and set him down in here. Let's see. Any luck? Oh, I see him. Okay, we're going to throw Ray on screen because y'all been waiting long enough. Look who that is.
How are you guys?
What's up, Lieutenant Hermosillo? Thank you for doing this last minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you got the day off. You're chilling, and you went into the office just to come hang out with us. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. You're very welcome.
Yeah, so before we jump in, you good? Just living life?
I got everything I need. I'm good.
That's good. That's
I like
good.
the background, by the way.
Thank you. It's very zen. I like things chill.
Yeah.
I like things chill. Yeah, so you are so familiar with investigating a case that is in the public eye on a worldwide stage. I mean, people are waiting for any update they can get. So I thought it'd be perfect to bring you on to give some insight into what these investigators are going through. We're not going to get into the reported back and forth with the departments and stuff like that, or possible, where there may be some conflicts going on, because we don't want to talk bad about it. They're doing their best. But really just, what is it like when you are handed a case that Because in the beginning, this did not gain the worldwide attention. It took a little time for the word to get out that JJ and Tyler were missing. But once you guys made it public, how quickly did that online momentum pick up?
So, I mean, it was with our case, it was instant. I mean, anytime you have two kids missing and the mom isn't coming forward or the stepdad, it's going to gain national attention, right? So it was instant when we made that public. Um, we put out that public memo. I think it was December 20th, 2019. But within hours, days, we were getting the national media attention. So it was pretty quick.
Yeah, I can imagine it. And with this case, sort of the same concept in that you're dealing with vulnerable populations,
Right.
children, elderly. If you
Sure.
take away the fact that Savannah Guthrie's mom, this is an 84-year-old woman that was taken from her home at night. And so I think cases like that do get a lot more attention. There's always talk that every case deserves it, and gosh knows we know that. But once the media started settling in, I mean, does that hinder your investigation in any way? I mean, I'm sure it does, but in what ways?
Yeah, it could. Right. The media is they could be your enemy or your friend. And so when you have this national recognized case, and in this case with her being an elderly female, the media expects some type of information. And so with our case, we would feed the media just a little bit, right? Because you're doing things behind the scenes that you don't necessarily want the media or the public to know about. So but the media is kind of a monster. You have to be able to feed the media some information, or they're just going to create their own narrative. And when they start creating their own narrative, that's when you start running into problems and having to put out fires, because a lot of the information that they're posting isn't necessarily true or accurate. They're just having to speculate. And today's day and age, I mean, if a media company puts out a one sentence, just little blurb, that hits the world within seconds. And so you get people from all over asking about something that necessarily isn't accurate or isn't true.
Right. And we see that in every big case like this, but in this one especially, we haven't had press conferences in over a week. However, the sheriff has been talking to media outlets. But I agree with you. You start to see when statements are few, speculation just goes off the charts. And I would imagine that, there were times you guys, I'm sure, had to sort of pivot to address online rumors that, you're taking time away from your investigation to clarify things that just took off online. And it doesn't have to be anybody with a big following. It could be one post that goes viral from somebody in a chat room, and then you guys have got to deal with that.
Right. And then you're taking, like you said, you're taking away from the investigation and resources that should be put towards finding whoever you're looking for. In this case, Nancy. So when you're taking away from that, it hinders, like you said, hinders the investigation. So it's really better up front just to feed the media a little bit. They're always going to want more. They're always going to be asking more. And of course, there's always going to be speculation on what's going on behind the scenes. And we were lucky in ours because it was a lot of small town media that really picked the case up pretty quickly. And so they were really good to work with, because there were times where we're like, you know what, there are things going on we can't release. Hang on to that, but you can release this. And they were good to work with. So, it depends on the relationship with media. In today's day and age, law enforcement personnel and agencies have to have a good working relationship with media.
Yeah, I agree. And on the flip side, having so many eyes on a case can generate leads that can become valid and workable for you guys.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you guys are getting in tips, now you guys brought in the FBI, so it's much like this case. There's a cooperation there, and you're working in tandem with them to, quickly get the best outcome, or quickly get your facts in. But are there times where you get people that want to leak things to the media that really shouldn't be out there, and how frustrating is that?
It's super frustrating. Luckily, we didn't have too much of that. Um, Everybody, we had meetings right up front, and we all knew this is going to be scrutinized. It's going to be under the microscope. So everybody has to really watch what you say to the media, and that's why it's important, Gigi, to have one point of contact when it comes to the media. Because if you have guys giving different statements and contradicting each other, it just makes it look like kind of a shoddy investigation. And that's not what anybody wants. I'm sure the agencies down there are working hard behind the scenes, and everybody wants the best outcome, like you said. But it does add a different stress level for sure.
I'm sure, yeah. And I think the one important thing to know is you have your heads of the departments like your sheriff and whoever's heading up the FBI, and then you have your investigators who are the ones out there, boots on the ground, canvassing those neighborhoods, working those leads. What is it like for the investigators that aren't in a position of authority to give interviews? Uh, I mean, what are their days like? I mean, he said some of these guys are working 20 hours a day right now. Guys and gals are working 20 hours a day right now.
I can believe it. They're working hard. They're doing. I always equate it to that old saying, like a duck on a pond, right? Everything looks calm on the surface, but underneath the water, those ducks' legs are kicking like crazy, trying to stay afloat. And that's kind of how these investigations go. You have the point of contact or the PIO giving the brief, just minute bits of information that these guys are doing. But behind the scenes, they are working like crazy, and there were 20-hour days, and there was a lot of investigators on our side with the Daybell case that really saw what we needed to do and didn't balk at getting it done. And we were able to work well with the AG's office and FBI and other federal agencies. And I think that's the most important thing here is you've got to work well with those other agencies. And we were able to do that. I mean, there was really no hiccups at all in the very beginning. But yeah, those investigators, the boots on the ground, they're working like crazy, and I'm sure they are.
Yeah. Now, when you start to get these thousands and thousands of tips in, how do you vet those into what is somebody's theory or thoughts on the case versus what could be a relevant tip?
That's a great question. So every tip that comes in when we head through the FBI or the police department, we have to vet everyone. And so we would have officers that would assign a number to each tip. Investigators would get a pile of tips on their desk every morning when they came in, and we would have to go through those tips and call the responsible party and ask them what they saw or what they didn't see. And we, based on that tip, we would see if that needed to go any further. And so, yeah, you're working the case, but then you have these tips coming in that you're also having to work as well. And there were a lot of, oh, I saw them, or I saw the kids, or I'm sure they're getting the exact same thing. But that takes time to go through every single tip. And I think sometimes the public doesn't understand, and they see a lot of movies and crime shows where in these crime shows they can solve the case within an hour. And these things take time. Getting warrants for Google or warrants for cell phones or just all sorts of different things. It takes a lot of time to do it right and do it thoroughly.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, is when you are doing like they're doing these tower dumps where they're looking at phone numbers that were in the area, but you have not just the cell phone tower, you have different sectors, and then you're trying to figure out a route of travel. I mean, all that's really tedious work. I know a lot of that is done by the FBI and their teams, but there's so many moving parts to the investigation.
Right.
I
Yep.
mean, you have that kind of stuff, and then, you're waiting on these returns for cell phone records, and, um, you know, also with this case, they're having to look at Walmarts around Tucson and outside of Tucson to try and figure out who has bought these items within the last several months, and then you have to go physically, I'm guessing, to each Walmart to look at surveillance video?
We would go physically to each Walmart. We would even pull receipts from people we thought were persons of interest at the time. Pull receipts, how they paid for it, and then you'd get a warrant for their credit card and look at that. I mean, there's so many leads in the very beginning of investigation that you don't know what is important. So you have to follow up on everything. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investigators. And, there's with this case, they're going to be going through a lot of ring cams and traffic cameras, and just they're following up on everything. And I'm sure they're working hard doing it.
Yeah, I mean, just this past weekend, we had a raid Friday night where people were detained but no arrests. And they're waiting to give a statement based on some forensic testing. And we know they got that DNA back on Saturday. The FBI did, which has to undergo quality control. Then they'll run it through CODIS. And then I guess if that falls flat, they'll look at more ancestry DNA methods to go. But it's really important to talk about these things because, like you say, we think it's like a CSI episode, 45 minutes minus commercials. It's going to be solved, but there are things that just take time.
Right. And in our case, I mean, we have the FBI and all of our investigative team working nonstop, 5, 6, 7 days a week, where that's all we were doing. That is it. All the other cases were put on hold. That's all we were doing. And it took us 8 months, 7 months to be able to find JJ and Tylee. So, I feel bad for those guys because they are under a lot of scrutiny, and the court of public opinion sometimes can be rough.
Right.
But I would just encourage the public and everybody watching that, I would wait till the final product to see what exactly these guys are doing, and don't be so quick to jump the gun about whether they're not doing something or they're doing something they shouldn't.
And I always say we probably know 5 or 10% of what's actually happening behind the scenes. So there are much bigger things at play here that we just don't know. And at this point, we shouldn't know. And talking about these investigators, this firsthand. I mean, this is not stuff you go home and pop your feet up and you just forget about till the next morning.
Right. No, this is something they're taking home with them. I guarantee they're sitting there with their families. They're thinking about it, thinking about what needs done, what wasn't done, what we could have done differently, what needs to be done better in the future. I mean, it is something that's going to be on the forefront of their mind until they find Nancy.
Yeah, it's and I think, the urgency obviously is, in your case, it was 2 children. In this case, it's an elderly woman, and time is definitely of the essence. But yeah, it's just crazy. But things do take time. And you have just finding that glove 2 miles away from her home last week. Now you have a whole area to canvas this new. And then with this raid Friday night, they're going to have to go pull surveillance from neighbors and businesses on that busy road. So, more work just seems to be put on them day by day. And, so they're having to follow up on that. But you felt that y'all's relationship with the FBI was very cohesive because you guys had several departments. I mean, this went into Arizona, this went into Idaho, different jurisdictions in Idaho, and then you had the FBI come in. So you have 4 or 5 different agencies. Just you guys were having these all agency meetings where everybody got together and just told what you had.
Yeah, it was daily. We would have phone calls and briefings with all the agencies on the phone, all the investigators, and kind of task out certain things that still needed to be done or check out things that were outstanding still. But our relationship with Arizona, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, we always worked well together, and everybody put their egos at the door. And I think that's super important in a case like this too, because, you have type A personalities in law enforcement that want to take charge and feel like it's my backyard, so our agency is going to do it this way. We never ran into that. I think everybody put their egos at the door. We worked well. There was whether you were a lieutenant or a top dog FBI agent, everybody was doing the little things to find JJ and Tylee. And I think that's going to be important in this case as well. There are a lot of type A personalities, and I think they just, not that they haven't put their egos at the door, but it's going to be something they're going to have to check.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just for the greater good. Kay Woodcock in the chat says Ray Hermosillo, a big part of the A team who solved our cases.
Hi, Kay.
Hey, Kay. We love you. Yeah, I mean, and so with the family, you guys, I mean, I think all of you guys are definitely, have this connection for life, and And there's some beauty in the relationships that you do form in these tragedies. And this isn't a tragedy yet. There's always hope. Now, let's just say that they had other surveillance that they were able to recover, but they haven't released it. What would be a really strategic reason to not release additional footage at this time? Is it that the doorbell video for now is good enough? Could it be that there's something on that other video they don't want the public to see?
Oh, absolutely. We had surveillance video that we never released, and it's just because it could be a potential lead, and you don't want to spook somebody if you release something and these guys are like, oh, they're on to me, or they know what vehicle I drive, or whatever the case is. So there's always going to be that surveillance or those pieces of information that we don't want the public to know.
And we saw that in your case, because when you guys went to do the welfare check, well, they split town.
Right.
Everybody scattered. So then it was, where's everybody gone?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's
And
the whole other problem.
Absolutely. And you're going to get that. So it's not a concern if they're not releasing everything. I wouldn't expect them to release everything. They've got to save some of that for court down the road, and, just make sure their T's are crossed and their I's are dotted. And, you want a successful investigation, but in the back of your mind, you have to be thinking, I want a successful prosecution for when we do nab these guys.
Exactly. And I think that's the goal for everybody. And there is a fine line to walk, because there are times where, in other cases, we've seen really solid evidence get tossed out on a technicality, or, because things weren't handled correctly. And that could be detrimental when you're trying to get your prosecution and get a successful conviction.
Sure.
But I would venture a guess that there are probably a lot of people under surveillance right now.
Yeah. There's going to be more than right? I mean, there's probably a lot. I agree with you.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just going through some of these questions here. We'll throw up a few. Yes, let's throw up a few viewer questions. Let's see here. There we go. What does he think the best way the public can help law enforcement in the case of Nancy Guthrie?
That's a good question. I think just anything you see or you think that you may know, or just minute things that you think that has to do or pertain to the case, call in the tip to the investigators or whatever hotline they have set up. But honestly, the best way for the public is to support those guys down there doing the hard work. And nobody goes into an investigation thinking they're not going to do it the correct way. They all have the best intentions, which is finding Nancy. So yeah, the more support these guys get, I think because there are times in our investigation where every road you hit was a dead end, and it kind of took the wind out of your sails. But we had a lot of support publicly and within the community worldwide.
Yeah.
And that support lifted us up quite a bit, more than people understand, because when you have the public saying, we support you guys, go get them, let's find them, it makes those hard days. The next morning, you're back in 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, working your butt off again. And so, these guys are human. They have those days, and yeah, public support, community support is probably the best way.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we got another question. Do officers on big cases like this make sure their colleagues don't get burned out? I think no time off could make people less effective and sharp. That's a good question.
That is a good question. Probably not, unfortunately. This is the type of case where you have all the boots on the ground and you want everybody working. And we kind of vowed in our case we're not going to stop until we find JJ and Tylee. And I think that's probably their mentality too. And unfortunately, yeah, you do get burned out really quickly. But you sit back and you realize that there are family members that want answers. The public wants answers. So our burnout, the police officers, the investigators burnout kind of takes a back seat to what the needs are for the public and the family.
That's me. I was just checking your lip reading skills there, Detective Hermosillo. And And you think about that too. I mean, it's kind of game time. This is like the Super Bowl. This is the once in a lifetime case for these investigators, most likely. So,
Right.
so these aren't your typical nuisance calls or noise disturbance calls or whatever. So I guess, you get that adrenaline going, and then your drive to get an answer and to find her safely is really what keeps you going. I'll put another question up. Do you think this could be a staged kidnapping or burglary gone wrong? My cat is attacking my leg. She wants out. Hang on.
I don't know what it could be a number of things. It could be a kidnapping. It could be a burglary gone wrong. It's just so hard to, unless I had more information of what was going on. It's hard to say, but it could be either one.
Yeah. It seems so odd to me that you would go in and kidnap an 84-year-old woman who can't walk more than 150 yards alone, who is on heart medication, that has a pacemaker. So on one hand, it kind of makes me think, did they just not know who lived there? Or is this a case where somebody knew her? I mean, we don't know. I'm just talking out loud. But, for me, it just doesn't make sense that this was a burglary gone wrong, because if that's the case, you just leave. You don't take the woman with you when you go.
Right. And it could be too. And I'm just speculating here. I know nothing
Right. Yeah.
other than what you know, but it could be that it was a burglary and they went in and she saw their face, or she can ID them, or knew who the suspect was. I mean, it could be a lot of things. And so they're trying to figure out what to do,
Yeah.
trying to buy themselves some time. So it could be a number of things.
Yeah. And, TMZ is kind of in the center of this investigation. They're getting these notes from people. They were getting ransom notes, which we haven't heard about those in a while. They have not been validated as real. But the newest one is somebody who says he knows who has Nancy. Prepare to go international. They're wanting Bitcoin instead of turning, because I thought, okay, they're asking for 66,000 in Bitcoin. Why not give them up for the 50,000 reward with the FBI and not catch felony for trying to extort people? But this person says that he has a record and doesn't want to cause any problems. But it has to be so frustrating for law enforcement, because clearly they're not finding the source of these emails. Whoever's doing this has really good encryption. And how much weight would you put on well, it's kind of definitely a hypothetical, because we don't know everything, but it has to be frustrating for law enforcement to get these letters, not know where they're coming from. And you have a woman's life hanging in the balance. So I guess you have to take those somewhat seriously.
Yeah, you have to take every tip seriously, because God forbid that one tip that they called in that you kind of pushed to the wayside or put on the back of your desk because you don't think it's important could be important.
That's
And so
true.
every tip that comes in, you have to vet and take seriously, just like the next tip. So I'm sure it is frustrating for those guys, especially to hear something like that. But with the encrypted emails, there's always going to be a way that law enforcement will find out. It
Yeah.
just takes time. And so these guys that think with the emails that they send encrypted, or when law enforcement goes after that stuff, we get warrants for things. That it's a digital age, and there's really no way to erase your digital footprint completely. And people, unfortunately, sometimes think that they can do that. But yeah, every tip needs to be vetted and looked at.
Yeah, and we see it time and time again. Digital forensics played a huge role in your case.
Yeah.
Pinging Alex Cox down to Chad's property each day after the kids were last seen. So sometimes you need that little piece of information that just sort of validates all the investigative work you've already done to say, this is something we need to check out. And that was, your investigation for months in tandem with this checking that Google location data, that all kind of came together. And I can't imagine what a moment that was for you guys when it all fit and you realize, okay, I know there's always that hope you're going to find a missing person alive, but in some ways too, resolution, even if it's bad, is good. Did you really have hope once you got that notice? Hey, we're noticing he's on the property at very specific times where he wasn't. Was that kind of your big aha moment in the case that, all right, maybe we're figuring this out?
Gigi, there really wasn't an aha moment. Think of it like a puzzle. And so each day or each month, we're getting little pieces of the puzzle and plugging them in. And one piece of information necessarily doesn't mean something until another piece of the puzzle is found. And so you can kind of paint a picture. And so even though we knew that Alex was on the property, we still needed to know the last proof of life, right? Otherwise, that doesn't mean anything that he's on the property. And so with the little bit of information we would get, we would plug that in, and then we got the text that Chad sent Tammy. And so when you look at the totality of everything, that's when it was like, okay, now we're painting a picture that maybe these kids are on the property. But initially, one piece of information out of that puzzle necessarily isn't the smoking gun.
Yeah. Good question by Sweet Doggy Mom. With so many investigators following up on tips, let me go back to that. I got it here. Is there a risk of missing two different tips that put together may be important?
There's always that risk, and I think communication is key, and that's why every day we would meet and go over the tips and assign a number so we could sit and look at every number was investigated or followed up on. But that's a great question. Yeah, there's always a risk of having information slip through the cracks, and law enforcement isn't perfect, and we try to set up a procedure where we're not going to lose information. And I'm sure that's what those guys are doing there. But yeah, that's always a risk. And that's why communication, especially during all the different agencies, was huge. And I thought we did a phenomenal job that way.
Yeah, and the communication, like you say, is key. Everybody come in for these meetings, just focus on what you're doing and see if any of that correlates. It's, I think the challenge with this, and you guys face this as well, is this is week 3 where we don't know if there's been a proof of life. I kind of thought maybe there was with the last message we saw with the siblings where she said, "We got your message, we understand, and we will pay." And then later there was no payment. But, and the one thing I pointed out to my listeners, a proof of life may not be a newspaper held up with the date, because AI is so prevalent in our society today. It's, what do you trust? But it could be a memory of, okay, ask them about vacation when Savannah was 12 and this happened. So I was trying to explain to my listeners that proof of life doesn't have to be a video or something. It could be something nobody else would know. And is it possible that they have got proof of life that they are not telling the public?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, there's always going to be those things that are attached to the case evidence wise, that if it's a big piece of evidence, they're not going to release it. And yeah, it could be that they have proof of life, and it could be that they're looking at metadata from different photographs or different surveillance or ring cams. I mean, there's so many different things, like you said, with AI out there. The public doesn't know what to trust, or people are putting it out there saying that this came from an investigator, or we got some of that too. So I would just, it's hard to believe everything you read in the media and everything you see online. That's where you hope these investigators are doing a thorough job in just doing what they're trained to do.
Yeah, and that's, for me, I just don't put it out there unless it comes from a credible media source or law enforcement, because the other night when we had the raid, within 10 minutes, we know the person detained was a Carlos. And within 10 minutes, there are 50 different pictures of 50 different Carloses all over Twitter with their home addresses and their workplaces. And, that's dangerous in this day and age. People's lives can be changed forever
Absolutely.
when the public, I think, as a whole means well. They want to help investigate, but sometimes it really can backfire on innocent people who 50 of these Carloses are sitting at home having no idea their pictures are floating around with bad comments under each one.
Right. And then it takes away from the investigators from finding Nancy to go put out these fires and to make sure these guys are safe as well. And, it just takes away from the resources. And like you said, the public is out there trying to help, but too much help is kind of a hindrance sometimes.
Yeah, I get that. Good question here from Noriki. I suck with names, so I probably butchered that. Do you think the Guthrie family is kept up to date with the developments in the investigation? And I know sometimes there are things you can't tell the family.
Right. And, we kind of went through that too. Kay and Larry were excellent to work with. Colby was excellent to work with. And there were times when we told them, there are some things we can't tell you, and just trust that we're working this case and we're working it hard. And here's a little bit of information, kind of what we're going for. And I'm sure it was frustrating to them, because you want to be in the middle of, that's your loved one, and you want to know everything going on. But there's still that risk of letting certain information out, not necessarily on purpose, but accidentally or a slip of the tongue, that can affect an investigation. So we were super careful what we told, family members, but I think they understood, and we met with them enough to know that we were putting all our eggs in this basket, and we were trying to find JJ and Tylee, and they understood. They were really good to work with.
Yeah. Now, in these kind of big cases like this, is there typically one person that's assigned as a liaison between the departments and the family?
Typically there is, yeah. There's always a PIO or somebody from the investigator side, whether it's the lead investigator on the case, or a public information officer or a victim's advocate from the FBI. They're going to be contacting family members and kind of giving them updates, because they know what to say and what not to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. And have you seen that video of the suspect at the front door?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people, here's my thing. A lot of people say he looks like a moron, but we're on week 3 with no word of where she is and no idea, at least publicly, who this person is. But, when you watch, it looks like he's going to bang on the door with his fist kind of balled up and hitting it on the side. And then he sees that camera, which I theorize probably was a little alert light that came on. And you see that moment where he wasn't anticipating that. He kind of wanders aimlessly and grabs the flowers and puts it up. And I think that's just a more than anything, I think for all of us, at least my listeners, it's been a glimpse into seeing in real time how something that could have been planned to a T, things go wrong. And then you see that where he just wasn't thinking of that. He goes to the left. It's all clear and nicely, there's gravel there. And then he just grabs a flower, which later we saw in the daylight next to her blood. Now, when you see things like that, when you go to a crime scene, somebody's missing and you see blood, obviously that's a big concern. Do you think that, well, in another direction, my question is this. This guy was in the house for 45 minutes after that doorbell was taken down, and then that last ping on her pacemaker. I'm sure whatever was going on in that house was not good for Mrs. Guthrie. To look at that video for me, Ray, it creeps me out just to think what she saw when either she opened the door or that person made entry. But does it concern you that there was blood at the crime scene?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's scary to look at for the public. It's scary to look at for the investigators too, because what these people were capable of, right? And you see, like you said, you see a moment in his face where he kind of panics and doesn't really know what to do. He's probably thinking, what the camera got, it's now introduced something maybe he wasn't expecting. But it's always scary, especially when you see blood or evidence of some type of violence or injury. It makes you that much more determined to figure out what happened.
Yeah. Now, aside from JJ and Tylee, have you ever worked a kidnapping case?
I have not worked a kidnapping case. No.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. It's been interesting to watch this unfold online. It's just people are smart, man. And then, in this day and age, we have our mainstream media out there, but then you also have content creators who are out there, following the action, going to these scenes and things like that. And I'm sure that just the media in general, the large presence. I saw a photo today. It's up and down each road, cars bumper to bumper in front of that house. And it just has to be stressful to know that so many people are reporting on your every move. And oftentimes with this case, it's been moves people didn't think were the best. But do you feel like with a case of this magnitude, there should be some weekly briefings as opposed to going just to the media? Or is the media the asset that you need to not have to answer questions, but just to get out what you need to get out? I mean, I can see where it would go both ways.
Yeah, and like I said before, the media is a monster. Whether you feed the good side or feed the bad side, they're going to come up with a narrative, right?
Mhm.
So when it came to JJ and Tylee's case, we didn't do weekly briefings. We would give the media a little bit of information if we were looking for dates or times or any video, like up in Yellowstone. We would put that out, but we didn't necessarily give briefings. But it's really a fine line, Gigi, because you want the media on your side. You want them to put out the correct narrative, but at the same time, it's not necessarily ideal to give weekly briefings. Briefings at some point, yes, but I wouldn't say weekly. And it is frustrating sometimes because you get these podcasters, or not you, by the way, or different people who want to be unseen to put this content out on their page, and it's not necessarily for the benefit of the family. It's for the benefit and monetary gain for themselves. And so that sometimes is frustrating. That was really frustrating in our case, because the things they were posting, the things they were doing, necessarily wasn't trying to assist law enforcement to get the correct information out. They were just putting out anything that got them likes or attention on social media. And so you're going to get that part too.
Right. And then sometimes too, you can have things that people see when they're doing that they think is one thing and they put it out, but it really isn't. And we saw that actually happen over the weekend with that raid. And this is kind of relevant to you. Well, very relevant, because you guys had to go to Yellowstone because that was where the last photo of JJ and Tylee was taken. How do you prep for searches of difficult terrain like that? Do you just go into like a war room and get the map out and say, this is where, because you guys probably had a route of travel through Yellowstone for them.
We did. And, you compare the route from, in this case, it was Alex Cox's cell phone. You compare the route to where they were, the times it took them to drive. And so you kind of get a rough idea of whether they spent a certain amount of time on a certain road that necessarily they didn't need to, like an extra half an hour or something. You would want to focus on a point like that. But, we were up in Yellowstone and we got surveillance video. And we had been planning on doing a search up there, and that would have taken a lot of manpower, a lot of logistics to pull something like that off, to do it correctly. And luckily, we didn't end up having to go that way because of other evidence that had surfaced. But yeah, the terrain, the logistics, all of that is super important.
Yeah, I went to Yellowstone right before Lori's sentencing. I just decided to take a solo 3-day trip. And, a lot of the time in there, I was thinking, my goodness, had they had to have searched Yellowstone, I mean, it would have been such an undertaking. And then you have the desert, because you go 10 minutes out of the city anywhere and you're just in open desert. There are, if they don't find her with somebody, this search could go on for a very, very long time, because it's the desert,
Yeah.
it's, and that's frustrating. And hopefully we have a happy ending, because, they're working on the theory right now that they think she could still very well still be alive. And look, don't count out an 84-year-old woman. They're tough old birds. And I hate to say elderly. I like to say, experienced veterans at living life. They've lived through a lot of stuff we haven't. And I know with my Grammy, who passed in November, some things that should have took her out, she was like, nah, I got to stay and keep y'all straight. So, the will to live in people, if she is alive, is very surprising, even in vulnerable populations. But does anybody else have any questions? I know you've got somewhere to be, so I don't want to take you too long. And hey, if this keeps going on, we might have you back. And
no, you're good. I was just going to say too, when these guys are out collecting evidence, you don't know what's important until it's important, right?
Mhm.
So it could be a pop can, or it could be a cigarette butt. It could be anything that doesn't necessarily look important at the time. So you have to collect everything, and then you sift through and say what's important based on different pieces of evidence that come out in the future of the case. So, and you always hold out hope, right? you always hold out hope that the victim is alive and well, and sometimes it works out that way, and unfortunately sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think with JJ and Tylee, I held out hope until that day I saw Nate in the air and saw you guys on the ground, and unfortunately, it was a very devastating ending that, and in this case too, if we have a good ending, nobody's ever gonna be the same. Mrs. Guthrie is never gonna be the same. The family is never gonna be the same from the trauma that they
Right.
have dealt with for 3 solid weeks. No matter the outcome, it's just a different level of trauma, and I think the same can be said for investigators that work these cases and the families, obviously. But, this is the first time in a very long time you, Kay, Larry, Colby, Tammy's family, you don't have a court case hanging over your head. We're going through the appeal process, which is very standard, and Judge Boyce did a beautiful job. You guys did a beautiful job of making sure these prosecutions and convictions were solid. So hats off to you guys. I know that pretty much everybody in here followed that case from day one. And, it's amazing how over the course of months, people that never met JJ, Tylee, or Mrs. Guthrie, you almost begin to care about them like you knew them because you're so invested in their well-being. And I think for people to be that invested in somebody they never met is an odd thing. It's rare these days. A lot of people don't care. But the outpouring of love and support that I've seen from Mrs. Guthrie echoes the love and support that I've seen for JJ and Tylee and the families involved. And, it's a good reminder that there are a lot of good people in the world and not just troublemakers behind a keyboard trying to say, things that aren't true or mean. Um, Hawkeyes loves nature. I love Ray's dedication and determination. And I will tell you firsthand, Ray Hermosillo and all those men and women up at Rexburg, some of the best people I know, and Ray's wife. Y'all are like my brother and sister from another mister, and just good people and favorite dream team today. There you go, Ray. Let's get our own show, me and you.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I want to reiterate, we had the best investigators. We had the best prosecution. We had the A team from the very beginning. And I've said before, you don't see that all the time. And we were super fortunate. Every one of them put everything aside. Like, it was the best team that I could ever work with.
Yeah. And it was very, very apparent. And, the best outcome to a horrible situation is making sure they are behind bars for the rest of their life. The last thing I want to ask you is, it seems like we're kind of at a point now where we have our biggest lead that we know of, which is this DNA. The DNA they have found from the glove, the foreign DNA in the house that does not belong to Mrs. Guthrie or anybody in her inner circle. And also they're testing some things apparently in this Range Rover from that raid Friday night. DNA evidence is so hard to dispute in a court of law, as is location data. Do you feel like that could be the break in this case if there's a hit?
Yeah, you get some foreign DNA in a house where you're not supposed to be, and they end up finding a match and figuring out who this cat is, right? And then they start doing a workup on him, and then do a workup on financials, and it kind of just a domino effect. But the fact that they found that DNA is super huge, super huge. And I hope they end up finding this person or persons of interest. But yeah, that's going to be a game changer, I think.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for us as people watching this unfold, just to make sure we're doing this responsibly?
I would just make sure that you vet each person or each piece of information before you go public with it. Make sure it's accurate. Give patience is huge. This stuff takes time to do it correctly and thoroughly. The testing isn't always super fast either. The DNA testing or any other forensic testing doesn't happen overnight. So I would just say patience. Know that these guys are working super hard. Everybody wants to find Nancy and bring her home with a positive outcome. But yeah, just patience and make sure you vet pieces of information before you go public with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of tips in my inbox from people that say they're local, and I'm like, thank you for that, but no way. I'm not going to be the reason any family member, suffers any additional heartache or pain in a time like this. Well, Mr. Hermosillo, Ray, Lieutenant Hermosillo, Mr. Hermosillo, like you're my teacher or something. Thank you so much for coming on very last minute. You are a rock star in the true crime world. I mean, we saw that at CrimeCon. It was like you were the George Clooney of CrimeCon. Everybody was gathered around you, and
no, that was Colby they were looking for.
well, Cole, you all are such amazing examples of how cases can be solved when you're dedicated for the right reasons, and all these different entities come together as one. And hopefully we'll have a good outcome here. But thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon, because you're kind of one of my favorite people. So,
thank you. Thanks for having me, Gigi. It was good to see
all
you
right,
again.
thanks, guys. We'll see you
Bye,
soon.
everybody.
Bye.
Okay.